Check one. All right, gang, let's get going. Welcome to episode 50 of This Week is Live. That's right. It's been 50 episodes, what is going to complete our first proper season of this show. Thank you so much for joining us. So glad to see you all. I'm your host, Raymond Flotad of mxdwn.com. That's Mixdown. Got a bunch of stories for you and kind of a tiny little wrap up of what has been this experiment, this experience, our first foray into the world of video content. Now, Mixdown, mxdwn.com, has been our music and entertainment magazine for these 20 years. And ultimately, this was largely an experiment in what would it be if we did video content. We've always been decidedly a journalistic endeavor. Written words has been basically our whole world. And to some extent, of course, photography in the arena of, live entertainment and music, and to some extent, Comic-Con conventions, things like that. So this was an experiment in real time in terms of ultimately, what would it be like if we did this kind of content? This is meant to be the first of many different shows that we're going to do, and all of them are going to be a little bit different. They're going to have different flavors. They're not all going to be like this. This was meant to be a little bit more of a news experience with an editorial comment. There are going to be shows in the realms of games. There's going to be shows in the realms of movies and television. And ultimately, this was something I was hoping to have a little more news for you here as we went into this final episode of season 1 of This Week is Live. There was going to be some special guests. Things did not work out. And ultimately, there was going to be another special guest. And of course, in our unfortunate modern world, sickness struck. And with sickness, there's not much that you can do. People are sick. Things don't happen. But I promise this is just the beginning. Now, some of you who have been seeing what we're up to in terms of video content that we're posting here, YouTube, and other places have seen that we've also been doing a lot of video interviews. I've been doing much more video interviews, and just this week we had the first of a bunch that are coming right now. Mark Harm from Mudhoney, and then today, Emily Kinney from The Walking Dead and as a solo singer-songwriter fame. Then the next one after that is going to be Blothar the Berserker from Gwar, and I promise you, you're not going to want to miss that one. It's a scream. It's absolutely hilarious in true Gwar fashion, where there is a moment in the show, in the interview, where he indicates of all the people that Gwar kills, they would never kill Dolly Parton because Dolly Parton is, and I quote, on our side. So this is the beginning of what's going to be a lot of different pieces of content that you can expect from Mixdown in terms of video content and different kinds of things. Everything will probably be handled in a similar fashion as to what you see here. There will be a live stream component on Twitch like we are doing right here, right now on Twitch. And then we will rebroadcast everything on YouTube a few days later. This will be the common component, but the format will be very different each time. We're going to try to make everything special to the arena that we're doing. And even in the arena of games, for example, whereas typically Twitch streamers, superimpose themselves in a video game and they can become influencers that way just by virtue of experience a game for public audience. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that if people are enjoying that. But we will be doing something different. We're going to try to bring something fresh to the fold every time that we have something for you. And of course, at this moment, I find myself a little bit sentimental, thinking that it's been just over a year since the first episode went live. And from very humble beginnings, we've tried to polish this off and make this more, focused, and to be able to make this more efficient. And how do we make sure it looks and sounds right? And ultimately, then how do we capture this insane world of content that's coming? The news, the stories that are breaking, how they impact the world. And I mean, our department heads for music, movies, games, and television will tell you any given week, there probably could be 50 stories we could talk about here. But I try to limit myself to no more than 7 or 8. Usually we go for 5. Today's stories will be 5 total. And so the aim here is really to try to cover the most pertinent and critical things that we can. I mentioned in last week's show that we don't often mention like album announcements, right? Bands release albums and announce albums all the time, and a lot of times really significant albums. But we don't talk about many of them here because there would be like 300 of them every month. There'd be just an endless supply of this release date, that release date. I'd just be droning on about release dates over and over again. It wouldn't really make for a super informative show. Not that we don't love albums. We review albums all the time. However, we try to focus what we can here on the things that are having the biggest impact on your world. Now, we don't regard what we do as Radio Free Europe, but we do think of what we do here as holistically everything that is entertainment. So if you're a consumer of entertainment, if you're a listener, an interactive player, a watcher, a person who experiences it live, we try to make this be about what are the things that are going to have the biggest impact in terms of how you spend your time and money. Now, we've had episodes where we've had editorial comments on the show where we talked about those kinds of things and our faith and commitment in you as a consumer. That we're here in the service and the purpose of trying to help you better understand your world because your time and your money are valuable. You are an educated, intelligent person. You like lots of different things. There's a big, crazy world out there. How do we focus what is happening in a way that's useful for you in terms of where do you go and what do you spend your time and money on? It's not always an easy conceit. There's so much happening, and some of it is incredibly dark. It's not always happy news. It's not always something that's good that's coming through that you're hearing about, but we're trying to help you understand your world and what's going on. And some of what we're going to end here in today's editorial comment is going to speak to that and ultimately what comes next. But first, let's get into our last stories of season 1, our last show of 2023 of This Week is Live. So we're going to start here today on something I kind of glossed over in the previous show, which was the opening debut of The Marvels from Marvel, which is kind of Captain Marvel 2. And therein, that sentence kind of gives you a sense of the enormity of the problem. Now, coming on the heels of what they called, Marvel Studios called, the Infinity Saga, which started with Iron Man 1 starring Robert Downey Jr. and built all the way to Avengers Endgame, Marvel was kind of riding the biggest high as a movie studio ever could in terms of incredible box office success and to some extent critical acclaim. People didn't have much to say that was bad about their movies, other than that they were annoyed that there were so many of them and they were also successful. But generally, they were really popular. People really liked them. They worked. And of course, a big part of that was one of the films, which had been a long time coming and promised, which was the Brie Larson starring Captain Marvel, which had become a character that had been more popular in the last 15, 20 years than perhaps the 20 or 30 before when the character was first introduced, which was originally a subplot to the male Captain Marvel and then became Ms. Marvel and then became a character called Binary and then eventually became Ms. Marvel again and then Captain Marvel. And this, the Carol Danvers, Brie Larson starring vehicle, was a $1.1 billion success, kind of sandwiched in between Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. So, of course, kind of riding the coattails of that success. One would have thought for a $1 billion franchise would have been an easy dunk. Not so much. There has been a train of perhaps less and less beloved Marvel movies. A lot of people didn't like Thor: Love and Thunder. The Eternals was inarguably kind of crap. I really wanted to like it. It just wasn't good. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania seemed to ruin everything that was good about that franchise and, taking a very likable, funny guy in Paul Rudd and turning it into like a low-rent Star Wars. And not to mention lots of TV shows. People can't really follow everything that's happening. And so really curious, and I thought so at first, going back several years, when they announced the sequel for Captain Marvel, which, could have been Captain Marvel, whatever. They called it The Marvels. And then they were basically focusing it on the characters Maria Rambeau that was being introduced in WandaVision, the first show on Disney Plus that was a decent success for Marvel Studios. And then also Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, which is, a decent success once again for Disney Plus. So the idea being that Marvel was expecting everybody to drag with them through the continuity. You're going to follow them through the continuity. You're going to care about every story that they had to talk about. And that meant you'd be more invested when this trio of really badass women were put together. Well, people apparently didn't care, or perhaps the title was confusing, because does any average consumer know what The Marvels means? It's just kind of confusing. And of course, this is after an endless freight train of superhero movies that have been coming out and superhero shows that have been coming out low these last 9 years. So it hasn't been there for a lack of any content. And we kind of glossed over this in the previous week's episode, but the opening weekend coming in for The Marvels was only $46 million. Now, you might say, whoa, that's a crap load of money. $46 million is no joke for any movie. A lot of movies wish they could make $46 million. But reports have indicated that Marvel probably spent something in the neighborhood of $250 million making this movie. That's a billion with a B, in case you're wondering what I'm saying. That is a crap ton of money to spend on a movie, and never mind the fact that there's probably an enormous marketing spend Now, there was a litany of things that probably went wrong here. The title might have been part of the problem, banking too much on the success of Ms. Marvel and, the offshoot character from WandaVision might have been a part of the problem. But also there was a big problem that none of the talent could be promoting the movie. They couldn't make a big announcement at Comic-Con, and this was because the monstrous SAG-AFTRA strike, which kind of gobbled up everything, along with the WGA strike, which was the Writers Guild of America, then the SAG-AFTRA strike. And basically, the rules of the strike meant that nobody could cross the line to even promote content from a studio that was in active negotiations with SAG-AFTRA. So all of these things may have been working together to make this not go so well, but people clearly didn't really care. Or maybe on some level, maybe they do, but they're just saying, well, that's interesting. But it's going to be on streaming in a handful of months, and I'll just wait for it. Nowadays, everyone's worked so hard to build up streaming as a business. Everyone's just kind of tuned to the notion of, well, we don't go out anymore. We sit at home. We sit at home and we watch things. That's all we really do. So this gets a little more dramatic as you look at it, because when you consider that usually a Marvel movie comes out and it steamrolls everyone at the box office, and for like a month, all of their movies kind of quake with fear. Well, this did not stay at number one for more than 1 week. In the second weekend, it did only 10 million in America. This is all, of course, domestic in North America. And then even over the third weekend, which was of course, last week in terms of the long 5-day Thanksgiving weekend, which is usually where a movie like this would get extra money because people start being on vacation and families start going out to movies because people don't really have to work on the long holiday weekend. Even over those 5 days, it only made 9 million, hence to be trampled by the new Hunger Games prequel that just came out. Craziness, right? Absolute craziness. It sits at 188 million total worldwide right now, 110 million of that coming from the international box office. So Bob Iger, who was, of course, originally the CEO, brought a lot of these different things, Star Wars and Marvel, to Disney, and then left and was replaced by Bob Chapek. And then Bob Chapek was ousted by the board. Apparently, they weren't happy with his progress, and a lot of that might have to do with the theme parks division. Who knows what really the case was, but then Bob Iger returned. And Bob Iger has been, as we reported on this show quite a bit over this past year, cleaning house, laid off a giant chunk of Disney's staff across all divisions, all departments. A lot of good people lost their jobs in the wake of cost-cutting efforts, in the wake of an inflationary economy, coming off overspending and overhiring during the pandemic, which seems to be a common problem between a lot of different industries. At first, everyone was suffering at the beginning of the pandemic, and then everybody hired everyone in sight without a regard for bottom line and how do we survive. And then when things started to come back to normal, oh shit, we're spending way too much money. Now we have to let everybody go. Really unfortunate for a lot of good people, many of which probably were there before all this madness happened. So Bob Iger has indicated in no uncertain terms, fixing Marvel, this is coming off reporting just yesterday, fixing Marvel and getting Marvel back on track creatively is his number one priority. And he accounted, whether this is true or not, who the hell knows? We may never know, and Marvel isn't known for being like terribly forthcoming about the inner workings and politics of their studio, but indicated just yesterday that he believed that a big part of the problem with Marvel's not going well was that a lot of it was shot during COVID, and that means there couldn't be, and I quote, executive oversight. I wonder if everyone else feels the same about that, but that's an interesting thing to point out. Like the loose implication being that the movie was being done, inmates running the asylum style, like the people who really should be making sure there was quality control weren't able to oversee it, and that the directors and the writers and the talent were kind of doing what they thought was best, and that might not be best. I don't know if I'm the talent or the directors, writers, producers in that movie. Maybe I don't feel so great right now, but we shall see. And one thing that I can say, given that you look at those kinds of numbers, and if you watch and you follow box office news as long as we have here at Mixdown, it's going to be very surprising if this movie even breaks even. Now, Marvel and Disney, they'll be fine. They've made billions of dollars on tons of movies for well over a decade now. They're not going to go out of business or anything. But you can see in just this much, the big boss is chiming in some not so flattering ways. I wouldn't be surprised if you see shakeups. I wouldn't be surprised if you see things be changed tremendously. And of course, one of the things that's been mentioned already is that other films that they had planned have been pushed off of 2024. And right now, the only Marvel film coming out in 2024 is the Deadpool 3 featuring Hugh Jackman returning as Wolverine. Everything else is being moved to later, presumably to give it more time to be good. So stay tuned. There probably will be a bit of a time where it's going to be a little quiet in this respect, and there probably won't be too much happening for a little bit, but this is going to be like a gathering storm kind of effort, because if I'm James Gunn, and I was just put in charge of DCEU over at Warner Brothers, I'm probably salivating at the chance to get something great out to the market right now, because people are thinking Marvel is reeling. Now, moving on. If you've been following Mixdown, what we do here since the very beginning, and who knows how many of you actually have, you know that in the first real year that we were going, we had our very first, very brief, there were only 5 albums on it, Album of the Year list. The beginnings of Mixdown, of course, the origins of us were album reviews and a music magazine. That's all we were in the beginning. And I could never be prouder of what were the top 5 things that we had in that first Album of the Year feature, because it was a pretty incredible bevy of what was happening in music at that point. So in no uncertain order, it was the Postal Service, Prefuse 73 and their one really incredible record, One Word Extinguisher, A Perfect Circle's masterpiece, 13th Step, the White Stripes with their, career-making record Elephant, that of course has Seven Nation Army, that you'll hear at every sporting event in the world for the rest of your life, along with We Are the Champions and We Will Rock You. And then Outkast's, which some people will call Andre 3000 and Big Boy's half solo albums, but Outkast, Speakerbox / The Love Below. That was our album of the year, the first year in existence. Now, there is to some extent something of an album that had some Outkast music on it, which was their soundtrack to their own movie, Idlewild, which wasn't a super great movie. But otherwise, there's been no Outkast since. It's been a big controversy for a long time in terms of what's going on there or what's happening. And Outkast is something that tons and tons of people love. I mean, they were as forward thinking in hip hop as almost any hip hop outside of Guru and Jazzmatazz, might have been, right? There were certainly moments where there's lots of really fun experimental things happening. Like, I come from the time of the Far Side in the early 90s, and they were a wonderful, inventive hip hop group. However, Outkast just kind of disappeared. Hey Ya was a monster, juggernaut, world-changing hit, diamond selling, RIA certified album. They won Album of the Year at the Grammys, which was an incredibly hard thing to do for a hip hop project, hip hop artist. And then not much else happened. Big Boy's been out there doing his thing. Big Boy's always been great and does solo albums that are great, does guests or helps certain careers. He's part of Janelle Monáe's early career, and Janelle Monáe's become a wonderful, incredible talent. But Andre 3000 hasn't really done too much. Andre 3000 has kind of made a business for himself of doing guest spots, guest verses on other people's songs. And he'll show up like he showed up on A Tribe Called Quest's final record, We Got It From Here, Thank You For Your Service. He showed up to do one verse on one song. Probably most prominently for Andre 3000 was that there was one collaboration, I believe, sponsored by Converse, because they were doing a thing of like special artist collaborations for a couple of years there, and it was him, James Murphy from LCD Sound System, and Gorillaz, but basically Damon Albarn, because Damon Albarn is Gorillaz, and they did a song together that was 15 minutes long called Do Your Thing. And if you haven't heard it, stop what you're doing and go listen to it, because it's basically a whole album in one song. It has everything. It feels like a Gorilla song. It feels like an LCD Sound System song. It feels like Andre 3000 going nuts, ad-libbing, rhyming as good as anybody can, and then a weird kind of like emotive outro. It's a full package for what it is. But besides their like 80 festival reunion that they did a few years back, which some people said they didn't love Andre 3000's performance. He himself admitted he was doing it because he had kids that were reaching college age and he wanted to be able to make sure that they didn't want for anything in terms of going to college. That was really all that came from Outkast. They did that one kind of reunion tour where they did all those stops and all those shows, mostly headlining festivals. Of course, they headlined 2 weekends at Coachella. And, I saw it. I was there the first weekend when a lot of people said they thought it was terrible, and I thought it was great. But, that's just me. I was really excited to hear them play and to hear what they were doing together and to see them together after so many years of them not being together. But there hasn't really been anything since. So then it was super, super, super curious when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Andre 3000 announced that he had a new album that was coming out. And the album was going to be not rapping, not really rhyming or anything that was what people want from him or expect from him, but it was going to be largely instrumental music with him playing the flute. That's right. You heard it here, and not first, but Andre 3000 is a concert flautist now. That is a thing that's happening. And this has become kind of an interesting kind of quirk because the first, I guess you could call it single. I don't know if instrumental flute songs really are singles, but the first of those songs, which is called, and I quote, make sure I read this word for word because I don't want to get this wrong. I swear I really wanted to make a rap album, but this is literally the way the wind blew me this time. It is a 12-minute and 20-second long song, and the reason we're talking about all this today is because it is the longest ever song to chart in the Billboard Hot 100. This beats Tool's Fear Inoculum, which took the crown itself a few years back when Fear Inoculum, the album of the same name, came out. So Andre 3000 now has a new accolade to his name, which is the longest ever song to be on the Hot 100 charts, which is, of course, is usually like, you know, this is a little lost to the younger viewers or listeners here, but the Hot 100 chart was used to be like what was tearing things up at radio, what was the pop singles, and what was like, and this is definitely not a pop single, but hey, Andre 3000 certainly does not feel like he needs to be doing too much else. And, you know, he kind of works at his own pace. I mean, he's long said himself, just to kind of wrap up on this topic, that he's been more interested in acting. And he has done some movies, but not a lot recently. He's been more interested in that, and he hasn't been terribly interested in doing conventional hip hop in any way. And, you know, I think it's interesting because this album has what I would call some of the most Andre 3000-y song titles that I can imagine, including song titles like That Night in Hawaii When I Turned Into a Panther and Started Making These Low Register Purring Tones That I Couldn't Control, ... Shit was wild. Clearly it was. And then, not also to be outdone, the slang word pussy rolls off the tongue with far better ease than the proper word vagina. Do you agree? Some things never change, even if you change from rapping to fluting. Flouting? I'm going to go with fluting. That's what we're going to go with right now. Moving right along, there was a rash of legal lawsuits that came through just before Thanksgiving. And this was a whole litany of people that, on some level, probably touched somebody that you appreciate in the world and the realm of entertainment. Now, ever since the Harvey Weinstein scandal, broken by Ronan Farrow years ago, we have existed in what you commonly refer to as like a post-Me Too world, where the kinds of heinous things of sexual assault, sexual misconduct, sexual harassment are no longer tolerated in this world. And to some extent, sometimes they mean nothing other than a person's career is in question and maybe they won't be able to do things. And sometimes there's been legitimate legal consequences, like in the arena of Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby, where, you know, both serving prison time, you know. And ultimately, this has kind of become its own torrent of holy crap kinds of stuff with people all over the map that, you know, sometimes just like, wow, you never would have expected. And of course, sometimes it's proven and borne out to be false. Sometimes the people that have been accused of being perpetrators of these things, the evidence will out and it turns out to be not what it looked like, you know, or maybe they were at worst a horrible date, but not a sexual assaulter. We're not going to get into who did what in terms of what's true and not true. That's obviously for a court of law to decide. But what's interesting about this moment, and this was coming literally the day before Thanksgiving last week, was there was a law that was passed called the Adult Survivors Act. And it had increased the statute of limitations for people to file lawsuits about sexual misconduct and sexual assault up until the 24th of November this year, 2023. So if you had something like that, there was just a moment more to be able to do it, and there was a rash of these lawsuits that were filed amidst the people who have claims. And of course, we're not going to try to characterize any of these things as for sure having happened. This is what's being alleged. Okay, so please understand, this is what's been alleged, and these are the lawsuits that have been filed. All of these include some degree of sexual assault, and that is what's being alleged. There is alleged sexual assault behind each of these lawsuits. Axl Rose from Guns N' Roses, stemming from allegations coming to incidents going far back as 1990. Diddy, the artist, formerly known as many different things. Diddy, Sean Combs, Puff Daddy, You've known him as an impresario, a pundit, a celebrity, of course, a big part of Notorious B.I.G.'s career in the 90s, and of course, a record label, Maverick for a very long time. 2 different sexual assault lawsuits. This is being after another one that had been filed that he settled and didn't end up going to trial just the other week. Just insane. Who is the lead singer guitar player of the famed, very left-leaning punk band Anti-Flag. Also, famed actor and sometimes singer and sometimes rapper Jamie Foxx, who, for a long time was a successful comedian before becoming a monstrously successful actor. These are the kinds of things that are going to play out for a very long time. And so we'll probably have little bits of news, notes there. It isn't the kind of thing where it's constructive to get super, super granular on details because it's a certain characterization of the events without actual evidence, demonstrable proof of any particular thing that's happened. We would just be wading into speculation. So we're not going to do that. However, it is certainly alarming. This many things amidst this many people touching this many sides, pockets, corners of music all at once. There's no way you can hear or see that and not be like, Jesus. Heartbreaking if it's true, heartbreaking if it's not true, heartbreaking that it's necessary. So let's move on to a little bit of a happier story. And this is one that I pulled into this because it's very near and dear to my heart. If you're a person who's played video games, you've probably heard of this, but if you're not, you're probably not aware of this. There is a franchise that was developed by the company Don't Nod out of France and is a part of the massive conglomerate of Square Enix and is a franchise called Life is Strange. Now, Life is Strange is a very different kind of animal in the arena of video games where for a long, long time, video games had some degree of innovation coming in the 80s and then the early 90s. But then as they evolved as a medium, it became more frantic, more action, more, violence. They became more adult as the fan base grew up along with video games, demanding more adult, more violent content. It's very, very common that along with like RPGs, which are a lot of hack and slash and fighting, that it usually ends up being some measure of a first-person shooter, as is called, a FPS, or what's sometimes referred to, not a thing to do with this channel that we're broadcasting live on right now, a Twitch game. And these things have become pervasive across video game culture. Video game culture often presented as if it's a culture for young boys, when really it's always been populated by 50% women playing games at the same time as men. So it was inevitable that there was going to be some kind of like a realignment in terms of what the content of this is now. And Zach Dalton, our games editor, and I, when we were at Summer Game Fest, we met influencers who all they do is cover what are called cozy games. No, I'm not crapping you. That's a whole subgenre now where it is just games where you organize a house. You put things here and you put things there and you put things there. And that's a whole pocket of people. There's a whole pocket of people who they love video games if it's that. If that's the thing that's happening, they're really, really down. So it's going to be hard to pinpoint one particular arena because there's certainly been great stories and great games with stories and things that weren't just violence and running and gunning or whatever for a long time. But Life is Strange, the first of which that came out in 2015, was something of a landmark in its time, not the least of which because the story centered on 2 teenage girls. And that was it. You saw the world through their eyes. You navigated them through the decisions and challenges of a weird, complex, and sometimes incredibly disheartening world. Now, the game was meant as kind of a visual novel, a choose-your-own-adventure experience, and there's been a lot of different companies like Telltale Games that have messed with this format and done a lot of really inventive things with it. Also, one of the coolest independent games coming of the last few years, Oxenfree, and now the new sequel that came out this year, Oxenfree 2 Lost Singles, were a big part of this. But Life is Strange was kind of a pioneer in this, with a small little twist of the supernatural. In the first game, it was like one character could rock and roll time, go back and forth in time, and just kind of an amazing experience, right? Talking about the things that a high school girl would go through, and in the best effort possible, trying to depict the challenges of that world, coupled with, like I say, a little bit of an element of the supernatural, being able to go, back and forth in time and trying to fix things. But not a running and gunning, not an action, not a boss battle, just that. Now, the game was so monstrously successful and is also a big part of launching the career of voice actress Ashley Birch, who played the character Chloe in the game and is now all the hell over the place, and was the lead star in Horizon Zero Dawn, and hence part of the show. What is it, Mythic Quest on Apple TV, and this game has now spawned several sequels. Sometimes they feature some of the same characters, like Life is Strange Before the Storm was kind of a prequel to the events of Life is Strange. But then also there is Life is Strange 2 and then Life is Strange True Colors, which featured totally different characters. Well, it's a kind of a happy little note today when there's something that is different and challenging and dares to go somewhere different than other game companies and other games would. Life is Strange, the original, has surpassed 20 million players lifetime, which is nothing insignificant for a game that's entirely narrative driven, entirely about two teenage girls and making choices and trying to navigate a world where mostly everyone has kind of abandoned them, which seems to be the common through line through all the Life is Strange games. Children that people aren't taking good enough care of, which has always been one of the things that fascinated me about the story, is neglect being such an immense part of our society. If you're interested in a long read, some years back during the pandemic, I ran a very, very long feature interviewing everyone to do with these games, writers, directors, the voice talent, even Amanda Palmer and Sadie Dupuis of Speedy Ortiz. And the feature is called I Really Do Care, Shouldn't You? A gold star to you if you know why I called it that and why I titled that story that, especially in that time frame. But congratulations to Don't Nod, and I'm sure there will be numerous more Life is Strange. It's kind of designed to be a bit of its own kind of, every game is its own story, its own little universe. So a lot of the characters people love most likely won't be revisited, and it'll be continuing anthologies within the story. And then lastly, to end off on some sad news, back in the arena of music, Shane McGowan, who had been for a very long time the lead singer of the famed Irish, British, Celtic punk rock folk band The Pogues, has passed away at the age of 65 years old. The announcement was made by his wife, Victoria Maria Clark, and where at first there wasn't any notion of what had happened. Apparently, she revealed to the New York Times that he passed away from pneumonia, had been kind of in and out of intensive care over the last month or so for various reasons, but apparently pneumonia. At the time of reporting, as we're sitting here recording this and broadcasting this video, more details on what happened, what caused it to happen, why it went fatal, and hasn't come through. It's very, very unfortunate. Victoria Mary Clark had said, "The love of my life and the most beautiful soul and beautiful angel and the sun and the moon and the start and end of everything that I hold dear has gone to be with Jesus and Mary and his beautiful mother Therese. I am blessed beyond words to have met him and to have loved him and to have been so endlessly and unconditionally loved by him and to have had so many years of life and love and joy and fun and laughter and so many adventures." Now, if you're a younger viewer here, you're probably like, who? You're probably wondering what this is. So there was a time, and kind of super unusual by where American pop music was, where this band, the Pogues, this was coming in the mid-'80s on through the early '90s, was an immensely successful band, had punched through in a lot of different ways. And Shane McGowan's vocal approach is super, super unusual. When you hear how he sings in this kind of talking, singing, sometimes speaking under his breath, but very evocative. That's really what he brought to the table, was a very distinct approach where there was a ton of nuance, even if it wasn't traditionally classically sung in this bright, airy, operatic kind of terms that we think of as like conventional correct singing. And they were immensely successful. There was obviously an Irish undertone to what they did, a folk music instrumentation to what they did. And there was a wonderful kind of poetic whimsy to the music and the songs that they did. So they were one of those great, great, great moments where something punched through in a way like Ritchie Valens did decades earlier that people might not have expected, but totally deserved to be. And, one of those things that begs the question of why the hell doesn't this happen more? But in their time, they were immensely successful. Now, chances are, whether you watch Ted Lasso or you just listen to the radio or you end up hearing Christmas songs when you're doing various things, that you've probably heard one of their songs that's become very famous in recent years, which is called Fairy Tale of New York. There is one lyric in that song that is offensive to some people and probably a bit dated by the time. But otherwise, it's a very lovely song, and it tends to get played more and more and more nowadays during the Christmas season. For me personally, one of the most prominent memories I have is being a diehard fan of HBO's The Wire. There's a very pivotal moment in the story where one of the characters dies, and the reason that character dies in the story is because the real guy who played the character, Robert F. Colesbury, who was the co-creator of The Wire, had really died in real life, and they had a big wake scene at an Irish bar, and all the police, all the detectives, all the DAs, all the investigators are all there drinking, drowning their sorrows, and they all basically, in the spirit of an Irish wake, try to uplift themselves by listening to the song Body of an American by the Pogues. And then they all, after a eulogy from one of the sergeants, come through and sing that song together as a way of trying to find some joy in the sorrow of thinking of this person who they loved being gone. Shane McGowan was an incredibly influential musician and singer that numerous people had nothing but good things to check out. And unfortunately, there was a fall that happened in 2015 that it seemed to have relegated him to a wheelchair, or at least when sometimes there were public appearances. And one of the last times I remember seeing anything from him or about him was when he had his birthday concert in 2018, and Nick Cave joined him singing Summer in Siam as a part of that show, and he was in a wheelchair while they were performing it. So rest in peace, Shane McGowan, and to all you Pokes fans, I'm sure this is a rotten day, because what a talent, what a unique kind of voice the world doesn't see enough of, and in a way that really brought special flavor to everything. So as we wrap up here, it is this moment looking at what a crazy trip this has been. And I know as we've been doing this, more and more of you here each week, more and more of you seeing and hearing the things that I'm saying, we're sharing, and of course this being kind of sitting on top of an avalanche, an army of people at Mixdown trying to hunt for stories, find stories, write stories, trying to understand this space, all the wonderful people from our music, movies, games, television, and Mixdown UK music departments. So thank you for all of you for joining us. And it's moments like this, as we kind of wrap up here, what's going to be our final episode of 2023, loosely being called Season 1, and that we will be back early next year in 2024, probably in early to mid-February. But I find myself thinking in times like this, and this is something that I think is important whenever anything ends, what did we learn? When we really look back at what happened and what we did, what did we learn from it? I mean, this is the thing that if you watch movies or television or listen to albums with me, I'm a pain in the ass because often that's the thing that I find myself coming away from. How did this enrich our experience, having experienced it? What did this do? What did we gain? What did we grow from this? Things that are just done just to do, I'm not super a big fan of. Just to have something for whatever and no other reason. Well, what did we learn? Now, it is kind of like building up thread as we go. Probably some of you noticed that over here, there's always something kind of in the front view of camera 2 here in this show. This is something that I use as kind of an on-screen Easter egg. Sometimes it's meant to be evocative of something that is being talked about in the editorial comment or in the news of what's happening. Sometimes it's just something cool or really interesting that somebody that we work with in media has sent to us. In this case, it is a ridiculous box set of Prince's not well celebrated enough album Diamond and Pearls that came through in the early 90s. And, which featured their big singles Get Off and Diamond and Pearls and Cream. And, Prince is a genius. So I'm really excited to have this and to be listening to it soon. But then also you might not notice that there has been something here also in camera 2. And today it has reached its final form, which is this itty bitty little cardboard cutout arcade. If you go back through, and yes, this really is a thing, and you watch through all the episodes of this show, you'll notice almost every single week I was cutting this piece of paper out a little bit at a time in preparation of building towards this little thing as a way of just a kind of an unconscious Easter egg of trying to work on something over time. Now, I am definitely not a man for arts and crafts, so it probably doesn't look as good as it was meant to when Atari sent me this little cutout thing, almost a year ago now. But as we've been going through this and we've been tracing the narrative of these stories and the different stuff that's been happening, what are the things that we've seen as we've been rolling through these stories? We've seen that the cost of everything massively increased. right? Inflation went nuts coming off the end, or I don't want to say the end, but coming off whatever was the first wave of living with COVID-19. And that meant that everything became harder. Normal, average, everyday people had much more trouble than ever before buying and affording things. And then if that was the case, that meant the cost of everything went up: gas, services, places to be, food, hotels. And that meant that a lot of bands started to have second thoughts about what was their main component of revenue: touring. If you're in music, the only way that you can go through and make a living in this day and age, because it used to be you maybe did shows because a record label put you on tour as a way of promoting the album, and then usually that's where you made your money, either on the advance or the royalties or the radio airplay of the album. Nowadays, that doesn't make you anything. I mean, half of this week was filled with artists, not the least of which being Weird Al hilariously talking about how 8 million streams probably made him $12, and he was going to take that $12 and buy himself a sandwich. But touring was where bands made their money. Being on the road now doesn't make as much sense as it used to, unless you're really famous and you get a big, commitment, a downside guarantee, as it's commonly called in the arena of touring and agency booking. It doesn't really make as much sense right now. But also you have an insane rising charge of costs for things. The Power Trip Festival, where I don't want to say famously, but infamously caught COVID and talked about it on this show. Most of the tickets for that event of any place and stature of decency were up to $1,000. Now, admittedly, 6 of the biggest hard rock metal bands there really is, between Tool, Metallica, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Guns N' Roses, and AC/DC. But holy crap, $1,000? It was a great event. Don't get me wrong. I was thrilled to be there. I was thrilled to be covering it. Bummed that I got COVID when I was there. But that is a crap load of money for anyone in any age bracket to go to hear 6 bands play. I mean, so this is why we started hearing reports in this show about how difficult things had become. Now, contrast that with what I think is still one of the craziest stories I've heard in years, which was coming off of this year's Coachella, where Frank Ocean, who had long had a reputation of scheduling himself for things and then canceling and not following through and not finishing, was slated to perform. Hours before the show, apparently insisted, or his management insisted, that he would not be on the live stream, had an ice skating rink built with ice skating performers that were going to do a whole ice skating whatever. I don't even know what that had to do with Frank Ocean's music, but cool. And scrapped all that. 2:00 the day of the show. Went on late. Spent maybe an hour of the show not performing his own music, kind of seceded some of the stage to his DJ and kind of loosely said this was like his radio club thing that he was doing. And then show got the plug pulled early, while at the same time that they wouldn't broadcast a live stream of it, and just average girl with an Instagram feed live streamed the whole thing from her phone. And then, of course, 3 days later, they announced that Frank Ocean was not going to be headlining weekend 2 of Coachella, and that he was being replaced by Blink-182, and then a kind of collaborative set from Fred again, Fortet, and Skrillex. And, Blink-182 being, the surprise act on weekend 1, and then got to play the biggest show of their career, because Frank Ocean can get offered numerous millions of dollars and not think it's important to do a good job or care. Whereas a ton of bands would saw their arm off just to be able to play that at a fair price. So we have, on one level, a world where things have become immensely difficult. And then on another level, people within the world acting as if the world is their ashtray. And that nothing really matters and who cares. Kind of a strange, discordant thing happening in this arena. Also, impossible to ignore in this world is, as Billy Corgan termed it last year, no one in the world is ready for how big of a disruption artificial intelligence is about to be. And holy shit, was he ever right, as he, being the incredible artist that he is, has tended to be in most of the things in his career, being a visionary and being able to see clearly what a lot of us haven't been able to see. And this year has been racked by the ability, the ease, that artificial intelligence can reproduce, create, or do almost anything. Now, in my world, in my life, I wanted for my birthday, when I turned 43 this year, to have my friends join me to play for the first time, not for me, but for them, a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. So I DM Dungeons and Dragons and I put this whole campaign together, and I basically asked them all a series of questions. Who are you? Where's your character? What is that? What is your character's backstory? We're going to be lost in the woods. Why did your character get lost in the woods? Half of the people who played used artificial intelligence to write their backstory. Instead of writing one paragraph themselves, they went to an AI, ChatGPT or whatever, and then asked it to create a backstory for a Dungeons and Dragons character, and then they handed that to me for the event. It's no surprise then, fueled by the inflation that we just spoke about, and also to that end, the rising threat of artificial intelligence, the rumbling that major television and movie studios were starting to insist upon people to have their digital likeness imaged in the purposes of reuse. That, of course, the Writers Guild of America and WGA and SAG-AFTRA, the Screen Actors Guild of Film and Television Radio Experts Association, both of them went on strike because of communication and contract breakdowns, wanting greater pay and benefits for their membership in the rise of time where streaming means much, much more than television or movies at the box office did, and there was like no accountability for what that was, or at least there wasn't until these agreements were hashed out. And then also how there was legitimately a threat that their jobs could be straight up replaced by artificial intelligence. I mean, I'm amazed that anything even got settled. I'm amazed that almost the entire workforce of the business didn't get run out of the business, because I'm sure on some level, the producers, the networks, the production companies are looking at it as like, wow, here's a way to get stuff done at a fraction of the cost of what it's costing us to do things. And think to our first story tonight, this little post-it right here in front of me, how the Marvels cost over $250 million allegedly to make. I'm sure on some level they're saying to themselves, how do we cut costs and do this cheaper? And they're probably salivating at the notion of not having to hire hundreds of thousands of extras, not having to write things. So hallelujah that the WGA extracted a deal where writers cannot be forced to have their work ingested into artificial intelligence. They cannot be forced to use artificial intelligence as source material for what they're doing. The studios have to employ real humans on this. And then, of course, on the SAG-AFTRA side, which is imminently going to be ratified. Imminently, I mean, there's some rumbling. Some people don't like the terms of the artificial intelligence terms of the agreement, but I mean, I would be surprised if it doesn't get ratified at this point. Everything's grinding to a halt. Everyone's about to start losing their jobs as money's going to start like really stopping coming through. Never mind, there might not be movie theaters if there's not movies to go in them and people don't buy tickets to them. I mean, Taylor Swift probably saved the movie theaters this year like Tom Cruise and Top Gun Maverick did last year. But then SAG-AFTRA, of course, has a similar terms in the deal where the actors cannot be forced to have their digital likeness ingested. They have to be notified it could be a thing. They have to have the ability to opt out if they don't want to. They can't be made to do that. So hallelujah, that's good news. But one thing that's clear, as I was talking with some friends over Thanksgiving Day, Thanksgiving, lunch, or however you do celebrate, if you celebrate Thanksgiving, it's here to stay. This is Westworld in our world. It isn't going to go away. You're not going to have a situation where, this is going to stop. You're not going to have it be where artificial intelligence is like the clown is out of the box now. It's here. It's here to stay. There's going to be some level of this pervasive in our society as a growing part of how things get done. There's been some mild controversies in the arena of video games of what things might be, voice acting or narration or script otherwise that might have been created using AI instead of human talent. This is going to be a part of the ecosystem permanently. So, of course, if you care about this issue, consider really demanding that all of this media and all of these things openly label whether artificial intelligence was a part of what was used to construct it. That's certainly a good solution. And then, of course, as with everything in America, you cast your votes with your dollars. However you vote at the ballot box, where you do or don't spend your money, and then, of course, your time, which really means your money, that's how you're communicating what you do and don't think is acceptable. Protests are great. Picketing is great. You can certainly stand up for your rights anytime you want to or feel the need to. But really, if you don't want to see something like this happen, make sure that you're not spending money on those things. Because if they can't make money doing it, they're not going to do it. Okay. And then what else have we talked about? Lots of different things in terms of everyday life, but apathy. A lack of empathy, a lack of caring, perhaps brought on by too many years of dealing with nonstop back to back crises, right? Coming through the years of Donald Trump's presidency, coming through the years of the COVID-19 pandemic, everything being shut down, no one being able to around each other, people are sick or dying. How dangerous is it? What is happening? Controversy over measures and mitigations of those things. Not even the whole populace could get behind. Let's wear masks and not have people get sick. I mean, so much drama, so much controversy, so much intensity. At first, the inability to be able to make ends meet and survive. Congress having to pull in and make sure that that doesn't screw half of the country. And then, of course, everybody frantically trying to get back to business and trying to want to be back to normal life. Normal life just isn't really here anymore. That world that we knew in 2019 irreparably changed. This is a different world that we live in now. And ask yourself when you go around in your world, the people that you see, the people you interact with. I've talked about this in a few of the different shows that we've done over this last year. What I see, and I hope you see something different wherever you are in America or the world, is a lot of people who seem burnt out on caring at all. Just fried on having to pay attention and having to be connected to things. It's just been too damn hard. Never mind that you put underneath that, and this is, of course, not really the purview of this show, but you put underneath that, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a sovereign country being invaded by an invading army who's just saying, oh, this is ours now. This is ours. We're taking it. And then an endless drought behind world food resources because people don't realize how much grain Ukraine supplies to the world, and that caused prices to go up further. And not to mention Hamas's invasion of Israel and Israel's counterattack in the Gaza Strip. So two terrible conflicts happening at the same time. I mean, if you don't have an opinion on these conflicts, which almost everyone does, it probably breaks your heart to see what's happening to ordinary citizens. War is not a good thing. It's not really that complicated. Usually, average citizens suffer quite badly behind whatever geopolitical melodrama causes them to happen. It's awful. I can understand anybody's frustration. I can understand anybody being tired. I can understand being exhausted. What a 4 years it's been, and what a year it's been since the first inauspicious event of this show coming on the air just over a year ago. This week is live. I don't blame anybody. It's hard out there. Do your best. Keep those you love close. Take care of the people that matter to you. But I'll offer this in closing tonight. And then, of course, we will be back next year for more of all of this, different shows, different content, more headlines, more editorial comments here. But of course, like I say, lots more different shows coming from Mixdown in the realm of video and video content and video live streams. But I'll end off here before we close tonight. And as I say, a good night for this show and for 2023. And then we'll see you next year. A big part of why all of this has ever been, a big part of why Mixdown has existed from the first, was a burgeoning desire to share what was good and exciting with people. Now, we've made it our mission to try to be something of an instrument of, education, to try to help empower people through knowing more about their world so that they can make better choices about themselves. We talked about that in a couple of the episodes early on in this show, that, our purpose has always been, we want you to be that you know more so that you can make the decisions that are right for yourself. Not that we've been trying to bark at people. Here's what you should like. Do this. But we've always been here as a part of what makes life great. It's also one of the heartbreaking things about covering news and being in the arena of news and news coverage when there's tragic deaths left, right, and center. There's sexual misconduct stories left, right, and center. It isn't a joy to talk about things like that. It's just unfortunately necessary to accurately talk about the world that's happening. But we've always been here wanting to surface the things that are excellent. Our goal has always been to kind of be that pan looking for gold in the stream, trying to find the nuggets of excellence in all these different arenas, music, movies, games, and television, not just here in North America, but worldwide. What's happening? What's exciting? What's great? What will enrich your life? What will bring you joy? What will help you feel like this insanely complicated and tragic world isn't quite so insane? Because the lattice work of human experience, our intellect and our art, our ability to build on each other, is very much the definition of not being crab stuck in a bucket. This ability to evolve through collective consciousness, intellect, skill, and ability is what makes us special as a species, at least to our knowledge unto the universe thus far. That lattice work of experience, that combination of those different things, that collective discussion, examination, and growth is what makes all of this worth it. Therein lies the challenge, therein lies the rub, and therein lies the thrill. Look what we can do. And not just that, look what's actually happening right now. While the world may try to focus you on things that are about big mechanizations of business or what being cool means, there's all of this awesome right in front of your face, right here for the taking. Now, it may not be curative in terms of the challenges that were or are, the challenges that are out there. It may not be a simple salve for those things and just make them all better. Obviously, entertainment and entertainment content can't simply fix a literal hot war. It cannot deflation. I'm just making up words right now, but you cannot reverse inflation just through the mechanism of having a great song or a great movie or a great video game. But that breath of inspiration, those pieces of what we are and how that can be what is the better place in the world, to me has always been the way forward. How can we take those things, surface them, help share them, and engage and embrace these best elements of the human experience in terms of all of uniting all of us? How do we all become a part of that discussion and that dialogue? How do we all know better what's significant and what's interesting and what's impressive across all cultures, all genres, all mediums, all styles, all statures? Stop treating stuff that's happening in smaller artistic pockets as irrelevant unless it makes baskets of money. Stop treating actual business that keeps jobs in place as being irrelevant because it's not arty enough. Everything matters. And so within this, I hope as you go into your Christmas season, which is always very stressful, let's be 100% honest. And as you go into this, last days that were coming up, this last month of 2023, from all of us here at Mixdown, we hope that you have a wonderful holidays. Keep an eye out for, of course, the video content that I mentioned. Keep an eye out for our end of year features. We always have an album of the year and song of the year list. We always have a game of the year list, television show of the year list, and we always have a bevy of features in our movies department for best movies, most anticipated movies, best performances. Be watching that all throughout December. But from all of us here at Mixdown, please have a wonderful time. Share the things you love with the people that you love. Engage and experience those things which you might not necessarily usually allow yourself to. Go beyond your borders and know that there is just wonderful breath of beauty and innovation and inspiration everywhere that you look. We're going to be here every day, just like we always have been, trying to find it, surface it, examine it, understand it, and share it for everyone at large. So, thank you so much for joining us, whether this is your first time listening and watching this show or whether this is your 50th, because holy crap, how the hell did we get to 50 episodes so fast? I promise this is just the beginning. We'll be back in 2024, if you don't already. Wherever you use video or YouTube or Twitch or social media, please subscribe to us on Twitch, follow us, subscribe to us on YouTube and all of our other social media profiles. We are at Mixdown Video on YouTube, but everywhere else we're at MXDWN or just MXWN. Please subscribe and follow us in all of those places. We'll be back with more soon, I promise. Lots more surprises, lots more shows, lots more content. And of course, This Week is Live will return probably mid-February 2024. Thanks so much for joining us. So glad to see you well.